Hello, welcome to the NIHR Insights Engagement Programme for the West Midlands. The webinar today is presented by Keele University. The webinar is about the importance of public involvement with a research study. I will now hand over to our presenters to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Alicia. So I think I'm going to start off this morning. So it's great to see so many people on the call actually for one around PPIE, which is brilliant because this is, as I was saying this morning, the foundation of what we do in research. If we get this right, hopefully the rest of it will follow. So my name's Gwen Wynne-Jones. I'm a Professor of Nursing here at Keele University. And my role today is to talk about how we've embedded PPIE in a research project. But what I'm going to do is introduce Adele Higginbottom. She's going to start speaking for us today, first off. And Adele is one of our PPIE project officers within the Impact Accelerator unit up at Keele University. We also have on the call Linda Parton and John Pemberton, who are both bring their lived experience and have worked with us at Keele on some of our research, but has also worked much more broadly around bringing that lived experience to research more widely. So I'm going to start by sharing some slides. Let me find the right ones. Here we go. So we will hand over to Adele to start off with. Adele, if you let me know when you need your next slides, then I can just make sure that those follow through for you. So let's get that right. Here we go. And just a quick overview before we start with Adele of what the plan is. So Adele's going to talk through what PPI is. I'm going to provide an example of how we've included PPIE in a randomized controlled trial. And then we're going to ask Linda and John to bring their lived experience. And we're happy to take questions towards the end and also to have sort of a bit of a discussion with perhaps Linda and John and ourselves around how this process has worked for all of us. So Adele, over to you.
Thank you, Gwen. That's lovely of you. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here today to talk about patient and public involvement. I can promise you that those of us who are speaking today are very passionate about PPI. So we're really looking forward to it. So what is patient-public involvement, PPI? It's a mutually respectful and a beneficial partnership with genuinely shared ownership within all aspects of research. So we have public members who offer their insights, their advice and experiences of health and care, which they bring with them their lived experiences of living with these health conditions, which then in turn will improve the quality, the relevance and the effectiveness, which also will then benefit research. So next slide, please, Gwen. So if we think about, I know a lot of researchers or PhD students that I've talked to will say, when do I involve PPI? So as you can see here, we have the research cycle. And if we think about it, well, we involve PPI, we involve public contributors throughout the whole research cycle. So right at the very beginning, when you're thinking about your research question, when you're thinking about your grant application, that's the time to have a couple of public contributors with you, with their lived experience of living with the health condition that you may be researching. If we follow on, you can see we have PPI at the core. So with design and managing. So when you start to have your study advisory group meetings with your PPI members, they can help work with you together and you can shape and design the research. Within the disseminating, when you're thinking about how we're going to disseminate the results, honestly, the public contributors, they can come up with some wonderful ideas to help think how you can get the dissemination out there. The implementation of the research, you can have public members involved in that, evaluating impact. So I think it's always important, don't think about it just when you think, oh, I'll have one meeting and I'll talk to public contributors. Try and involve them throughout the whole of your study, throughout your research cycle. Next slide, please. So who are these people? Who are the public? Who can we ask? Well, actually, we can ask anybody. We can ask patients, families and carers. And I think this is so important. I think if you're living with somebody or you care for somebody who has a health condition, you probably know as much about that health condition as they do. So you're very welcome to join the meetings, but also you bring a different notion. You bring different aspects that they might feel about members of the public, all members of the public. And then, of course, we have charity groups and community groups representatives. And I think that really helps them with getting a diverse and inclusive group. And also think about ages. I can say that here at Keele, within our group, our youngest public member was 8 when he started, and our oldest is 92. So, you know, think about the age range as well. Next slide, please, Gwen. So then we think about, so how do we do this? So I'd like to just talk in the next few slides about some practical tips that can help when you're thinking about your PPI activities. So the first and most important thing is about your topic area and your research question and how that will impact your approach to finding public contributors. So say if you're doing a research on knee osteoarthritis for people over the age of 65, then really think about that target group. Think about having people who are over the age of 65 who suffer with knee osteoarthritis. Think about where you can find these people. And it's very important once you've chosen your approach to go with it, but also think that you can change things at any time. You will have public members who will be join at the beginning but might not be able to stay with you through the whole of your research. So you always need to be thinking about and looking about where you can find new members. Next slide, please, Gwen. So let's think about when you're planning your involvement. So I think the first thing is, what's the added value to your research? So again, thinking about your meetings, think about the timeline of your research study. When in that timeline do I want to have public contributors involved? Right at the beginning, when you're thinking about the lay summary, your grant application, what better than to have 1 or 2 public members looking at that lay summary? We all do it. We all use research jargon, clinical jargon. Obviously, you don't need that within your lay summary. That is a perfect opportunity to have public involvement right at the very beginning. Also think about how they can shape and design the research. So think about the questions that you have at each meeting. Think about what is it at that meeting for that particular time within your timeline that you want to discuss. So again, who should I involve? So a little bit like we said previously, think about your topic, think about who you'd like there, think about trying, if you can, to get a diverse group. What are the practicalities? So when am I going to have the meeting? Where am I going to have the meeting? For how long for? If we have a face-to-face meeting, do I have to think about parking? When do we have it? Try not to have a meeting over lunchtime. Always think about having, if it is a face-to-face meeting, refreshments, a cup of tea, coffee, water, biscuits. That just helps, you know, to make a nice environment, friendly environment. Then researchers will say, well, do I have the skills? And I think public involvement is, I do think you learn public involvement skills as you do it, as you learn on the job, but there are lots of help out there. So on the NIHR website, there are lots of guides and videos that can help you to get skills. What are the costs? These are, I think, the most important things we need to think about. Everybody else at that meeting in a staff environment is getting paid. We need to think about the public contributors. We need to offer them payment for their time. You may have public members who don't want to be paid. They may just want to do it for the good. There's a lot of confusion. You may have people come and say, well, I don't want to take money out of the NHS. And you have to explain, well, obviously, this isn't taking money out of the NHS. The research is funded, and we've funded for public members to be involved. We have to think about face-to-face meetings, refreshments. We have to think about travel expenses, but also within your grant applications, think about how many meetings you would like, how many public members you want at each meeting. And the NIHR advised £25 an hour and roughly £50 so for a 2-hour meeting. But what's in it for them? What's in it for the public contributors? I think we have to make them feel inclusive. We have to let them understand that we really appreciate their time they're giving up, the value that they bring. And it's wonderful today that we have Linda and John here. They're going to talk about how it feels being a public contributor and what they found was in it for them. So next slide, please, Gwen. So the main things are, if we're thinking about good practice, and the most thing I will always say to everybody is do it early. Think about your PPI meeting. Think well in advance. Plan it right at the beginning. Make sure that it's purpose-led. Make sure that what you want within your role, what you want to find from your research is within the meetings down the line. Make sure for every meeting you know what you want to talk about, you have a role. Think about a diverse range of voices, whether this is age or communities involvement, different communities. How on earth, how do we get a diverse range of voices? And I'm holding my hands up here. It's not always easy. I think within research, we have our meetings, you know, in work time, we have our meetings 10 till 12 or 2 till 4. You know, sometimes we have to think outside the box. If we're after a younger group, then we will have meetings 6 till 7:30. You know, if we're having younger people, younger adults or younger children, you've got to think about how you can grab the people that you need for the best time. Manage expectations. So this is a double-edged sword. This is managing your expectations. So thinking about what you want and how you want your meetings to go and how you want your public involvement to go, but also managing the expectations of the public members. So not overburdening them with too much information at a meeting, making sure we give them information beforehand. Always treat them as a member of your team, of your research team. So with gratitude, dignity and respect, which will then in time help you to build relationships, which then helps to sustain the public members that you have. I think as a public member, one of the things you really want to know is, well, did I make a difference? What happened with us being there? What happened? You know, we said at that meeting, maybe you should do this. So timely and regular feedback after each meeting is vital and so important. And again, that helps to keep the relationship going and to sustain the public contributors. Providing guidance and support. So we here at Keele, we have a glossary of research terms that we share with our public members. We have a digital guide that when COVID struck and we went to online meetings, we have a digital guide that we share and helping to get onto a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting. And as I've mentioned before, offer payment and reimburse expenses if that's what the public member would wish. Next slide, please, Gwen. So thinking about the meetings, how can we have the meetings? You can have it in person, where you can have a workshop. You could do a community visit. There are things like an art-based workshop. We can have support group meetings or an advisory group. You can have virtual PPI, where you can have email consultation, online meetings. You can use digital post-it boards, and you can have pre-recorded material. But obviously you can match the two and you can have a hybrid meeting. So a few face-to-face and a few virtual. Next slide, please, Gwen. So we do have the national UK standards for public involvement. And there are 6 standards there. These are on the NIHR website. So as you can see, the 6 domains are inclusive opportunities, working together, support and learning, communications, impact, and governance. And I think for each standard, if you read what it says about each standard, with all your meetings, if you wait to these standards, they will help you. So thank you, Gwen. That's my last slide. And I look forward to questions later.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adele. So what I'll do in the interest of time and to make sure that we get through the content is to ask if you've got any questions, just kind of write them down so you don't forget, and we'll have make sure we have some time at the end to address those and have a good conversation about it with you. So the next stage that we're going to talk about is an example of PPI in a randomised controlled trial. And I'm talking about this because it's one of my trials. It's the Work and Vocational Advice trial. And we're fortunate actually that one of our public contributors today, John, was very much involved in this trial from start to finish. So we've got lots of experience around embedding that PPI within this particular example today. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of what that trial was. I'm going to explain the aim of PPI within that particular study, because I think it's really important at the start of research to understand what it is you're aiming to achieve with that PPI. And I think Adele has mentioned that a couple of times through her presentation as well. I'm going to look at how we engaged with our PPI and public members, at what points and for what purpose, so we can understand throughout that life cycle of a research study, a randomised controlled trial specifically, where we can get the best value from public involvement and how we can use that to make sure that we're doing the best research that we can, that will have a positive impact, hopefully, on those people who we're trying to benefit. And I'll show you in a sort of a pictorial way the overview of that PPI across the lifespan of this particular trial. So quite a bit to get through. We'll hopefully not be too tricky. So the trial that we're talking about today is the Work and Vocational Advice trial, and this one was aiming to determine in patients consulting in general practice who receive a fit note whether the addition of a vocational advice intervention to their usual primary care led to fewer days lost from work, and whether that vocational advice was cost effective. So when we start thinking about actually who do we want to engage in this particular study, we're thinking about where are we going to find these people. The logical choice here obviously is primary care, people who are off work sick. But there's quite a broad range and a broad kind of basis that we can identify potential public in contributors to this particular study. And what we aimed to do with our PPI in this trial was to ensure that we had the right research questions and that the right questions were being asked. So even before we started writing a funding application, we needed to make sure that the questions we were putting in there were the questions that our participants, our public contributors, felt were important to them around managing their health and work. To consider what methodology we were planning to use and whether that was acceptable, and whether there were changes to that we felt we needed to make, and to make sure that patient-facing materials were appropriate. Were they in plain English? Were they understandable? Do they make sense to people? Did it really give people that opportunity to fully understand what they were signing up to, or not, as the case may be for this particular trial? And we also wanted to ensure that PPIE was there to support the management of this trial and the interpretation of the findings. So we'll go through each of those separately, because that really is quite a broad aim to start with. So I'm going to focus on the main elements of the research and how you might develop your project. But I also think it's incredibly important to have public contributors engaged in your trial management group. So for us, that's the group that meets monthly and oversees that day-to-day running of the trial. We were fortunate we had John within this study who met with us every month, sat through those meetings and provided that continuous input and that continuous voice of our public contributor there. And actually that was incredibly helpful for us as a trial team, because I think there are decisions that we made that were strongly influenced by that public voice, which actually strengthened that research and made sure that we kept on track in terms of what we were doing and what we were aiming for with this particular study. Including public and contributors in your trial management and steering committee groups as well is incredibly important. And in fact, most of the main funders do mandate that you have public contributors in your trial steering committees as well. So making sure that they have that top level oversight, and again, can provide you with that additional voice around your research, how that research is managed, and some of the bigger decisions that you might have to make as you work your way through a project. But broadly speaking, what I'm going to talk about today is the PPI involvement we had in grant development, intervention development, the running and decision making after our feasibility study, and in the main trial that we conducted as well. So in terms of grant development, and I've put in brackets here and before, because it's not just about that grant development itself, it's about how you come up with the idea for the research in the first place. So with the WAVE trial, I'd spent a lot of time doing epidemiological studies, qualitative work with people who were struggling with their health and the impact of that on their work, and also with clinicians who were struggling to support their patients with their health and how it was impacting on their workplace. And they were the ones that were talking to us and telling us that actually they would benefit from someone independent in practice to support people back to work. Somewhere that they could refer patients to who were struggling, and for the patients, someone that they could spend time with and have a real conversation about how they could better manage health and work in a way that was supportive for them. So that's where we started to generate the ideas around this particular trial from some of that work. And we took these ideas to our PPIE group. I think we had about 6 people within that group who all had different experiences and lived experiences of their health conditions and how they managed them in the context of work. From people who were still working and managing their health in the workplace to people who'd had to leave the workplace because in this instance their pain condition was making it unfeasible for them to remain, for example. And having that breadth of experience, that breadth of lived experience, is really important to making sure that as we developed this randomized controlled trial, we took account of those broad experiences, the different areas where we could actually potentially make a difference to these individuals as we worked through and developed this. So this work really stems from the conversations that you're having with wider stakeholders, as well as these PPI and the lived experience voices. We also worked with our public contributors around that plain English summary. That is a hugely important piece of your grant application. It's not something that you leave to the last minute, write the last thing to write before you submit the grant. It's something that really takes a bit of work actually to get that right, to explain sometimes some quite complex and complicated methodologies and plans into a very short summary that's very easily understandable. And as we write grants, again, most of the larger funders will mandate that you have a co-applicant who is a public contributor. And it's about engaging and working with that person really early on to really get that plain English summary right. It's not something that we as academics and clinicians should be doing right at the end. So it's really important. Discussion and design of the trial, the methods, the timing of data collection, the length of your questionnaires, all of this needs to be considered as you're writing that grant up. Once those things are in that grant application, there is obviously scope to amend those later if you're successfully funded, but getting that right first time, getting that right early, and understanding the potential burden of that on the people that you're trying to recruit really comes from those individuals with lived experience. If someone's off work sick, they're struggling to manage their health condition, they don't want to be completing 20, 30-page questionnaires. It's not going to be appropriate. So it's thinking with your public contributor, what are the key points and how can we do this in the most efficient and helpful way possible? And as I said before, we really need to make sure that we have co-applicant, at least one. Often I would suggest actually having more than one on a grant application is helpful so that you get that diversity of experience and voices coming into your grant development as well. So once we'd developed that grant, we went through 2 rounds of submission actually, so we were successful in getting that funded. We then needed to start thinking, right, how are we going to deliver this? And the first step for this particular trial was that intervention development. And this really is about that individual's lived experience rather than the topic itself. So when we're developing our intervention, we really need to understand how people have experienced health impacting on their abilities to work. What have been the challenges for them? What might have helped them and why? And how can we build that in to our intervention so that we can use that and support people going forwards? Given that the WAVE trial was about working with health conditions and how that could be challenging, our PPI members within this particular study were not there to solve that problem, but they really talked to myself and the research team about their experiences and their stories particularly. And as a team, we considered what issues they were raising that could have helped them. We aligned that with evidence from past research, and with our public contributors, we created a model of what that intervention would look like. So it included some of the topics that they felt would have been useful for them to spend time thinking about, some of the difficulties they may have had in how they spoke to their employers or their line managers and how we could support them with that. So really thinking about how can we address the key issues that those people are telling us are impacting on their experience. And of course, once we've designed that intervention, we really need to think about how we deliver it. What training materials might be needed, and are they for clinicians or are they going to be for our participants in the trial? If they're for our participants, what do they look like? Can people understand the information that we're giving them within these training materials? If we're handing out leaflets or information sheets, for example, we really need to work with our public contributors to make sure that those are suitable, that they're going to be useful for individuals, and again, that we come back to that plain English language that we're using within those. So we don't want to be using acronyms, we don't want to be using some of our very clinical terms in these. We want to make this as understandable for as many people as possible. And within this particular trial, and we don't see this in all trials necessarily, so this is a particularly kind of whole programme that we're presenting today, is the running of a feasibility study. So within WAVE, we undertook a very small feasibility study. We wanted to recruit 30 participants, but to do that, you have to pretty much set up a full randomised controlled trial within that. So we really need to make sure that all of that participant-facing material, so our initial introduction letter, our participant information sheet, our consent forms, our questionnaires, our invitation in this instance to see a vocational advisor, all of that needed to be developed in conjunction with our public contributors. So that takes time. We need to make sure that we're factoring sufficient meetings. We need to make sure that those are, as Adele had spoken about earlier, a mix of face-to-face and hybrid. This was set up pre-COVID, so a lot of them were face-to-face back in those days. But COVID hit right when we started this trial, so we then quickly had to move online, and managing that process so that we actually create participant materials that are of benefit and useful is really important. We had to make sure that our public contributors supported us in the review of any intervention resources that were aimed at participants. So we had flyers around what the vocational advice service is that individuals could share with their employers, with their line managers. We had information around sleep and supporting people to manage sleep hygiene, so we know that impacts on people's abilities to work. But making sure those resources were suitable, appropriate. You want to avoid being patronising within these, which I think is easy to tip into. You want to avoid using jargon. You want to make them as useful and supportive as possible. And with that feasibility study, a really big thing was the interpretation of results. This was a particularly challenging study to recruit to. People who are off sick from work are understandably nervous about engaging in any studies that might impact their employment, or in some cases might impact their benefits as well. So being able to work with our public contributors to look at the results of that feasibility study and say, actually, we struggled here. Let's go back to that and think about why we struggled with that recruitment. What is it that we're missing? Have we not told them something, or have we put in something that's actually putting people off participating in this particular study. And so as a result of this conversation around the interpretation of results, we did make some significant changes to the recruitment and in parts of our participant information sheet from that feasibility study going into the main trial. And so into that main trial, well, there was that review of participant-facing materials and all those changes that we picked up from that feasibility study that were really important to make, and to make them in partnership with our public contributors. Again, we were reviewing how we recruit and invite people into this study, and again, making necessary changes in conjunction with our public contributors. And finally, with our main trial, there was that interpretation of results as well. And I think a little bit further to this that I've not actually included here is that dissemination. So John, who will talk to you in a few minutes, was our contributor, and he is named in all of our publications from the SWAP trial. And I think that's really important in terms of demonstrating that partnership, demonstrating and acknowledging the huge amount of work that our public contributors put into this for us and with us. We're all named as the researchers. It's only appropriate that we make sure we include our public contributors there as well, because they have contributed just as much and often more than we do as academics and researchers. So what does that look like over the life cycle of a trial? If we pull together, and I appreciate this is small, so you don't need to read the detail on this particular screen, but if we pull together all of the roles that our PPIE teams and our public contributors have undertaken in this one particular trial, we can create a model like this one that details when we engaged with our PPI teams, what the purpose of that was, what actions we were asking of our PPI members, and some of that additional information that we gained, some of that kind of feedback and information that perhaps we weren't expecting or that we hadn't considered as researchers as well during this. A lot of our challenges during this particular trial were COVID related, and getting that public contributor experience was really important as we navigated a constantly changing primary care situation and a constantly changing workforce situation as well. And when you think about public involvement in these sorts of terms and you really set it out step by step, it can help you understand what's needed early on so that you can plan that into your grant applications. You can make sure you're making best use of people's time, and you can make sure that it's funded appropriately as well, because we need to make sure that we're building that in early. And it also helps when you come to publications. It helps you to be able to track what you've done, the impact that that public contribution has had on your research. And understanding that impact is really important when we're reporting, and also when we're taking next steps post-research into impact or knowledge mobilisation of the results of your research as well. So it's quite comprehensive, right through from those early stages of coming up with your question through to that project management element, which is that oversight and everything in between. And that takes us right through that life cycle that Adele showed you right at the beginning of this afternoon's session. Now, there are lots of resources, and I think we share these slides with you afterwards, so don't feel like you have to write all these down right now. But there is a lot out there that will really support you with managing public contributors and that engagement within your research. This is just a snapshot of things that I quickly pulled off the internet the other day. I would strongly encourage you to look at these resources, because good public engagement and supporting our public contributors takes a little bit of work. It requires you to really listen and engage with the individuals that you're working with. You don't have to read everything here, but find what works for you particularly. And I think one of the kind of the challenges is that plain English summary, is that ability to actually listen and take on board what people are telling you. Our public contributors don't always tell you what you want to hear. Sometimes they will throw a spanner in the works, and quite rightly so. And that means you need to have that ability to step back, listen to that feedback, take that on board, and work with those individuals to find solutions and ways to manage those issues that they've raised with you. And that takes a bit of time to understand. It takes a little bit of thought around how you're going to build that into your research development and into your projects. So I think I've done my 15 minutes. I'm going to stop there around how we engage PPI and public contributors within a randomised control trial. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to our public contributors today. So I've got Linda Parton and John Pemberton have joined us. They are contributors to the research we've done at Keele, but also more widely, and they have been so generous in bringing and sharing their lived experiences with us, certainly at Keele and on a bit more of a national level as well. So John and Linda, I'm going to ask you to share some of your experiences around working with research teams, but also some of that wider research engagement that you've been involved in. I'll stop sharing so that I can see you and so can everyone else. Super. So Linda, John, I don't know who wants to start first. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how and why you got involved in PPIE work with us.
Ladies first, Linda.
Okay. Yeah. So how I got involved, it was a bit convoluted. I worked overseas in international development and worked with a lot of communities for the benefit of individuals and communities. So when I retired, I wanted to do something for my own community, but I hadn't got a clue what. Knew nothing about health research. The first thing I did, because I got a hearing loss, I was invited to join the NICE Guidance Committee for Hearing Loss, which I thoroughly enjoyed. First time I'd ever met researchers and academics. So that was exciting, I think. But one thing that really stuck with me after the 2 years of all these meetings and the three of us who'd got hearing loss talking about our experiences, as we were walking out, an ENT surgeon walked up to me. So very professional, very specialised. And he said, I want to thank you. I've been an ENT surgeon for 30 years and I never understood before what it was like to have a hearing loss. And I thought, wow. So when I got the chance to join with work at Keele, I jumped at it. And since then, I've been involved in research in all aspects, from formal identification of research priorities, being a participant, being a member of a PPI group, being a member of an advisory group, knowledge mobilisation, you name it in PPIE, and I've done it. Some experiences better than others, but that's a whole different session. Why do I do it? Well, as I said, I wanted to continue helping communities, but the benefits to me have been great. Enjoyment, learning. I've even been able to join a whole series of PhD training sessions in global health. I've learned a lot from academics, from clinicians. I get to ask the stupid questions, which is great. It's improved my own health literacy, which has been to the benefit of me and my family when dealing with clinicians. And I think one of the big things, there's loads of reasons. One of the big reasons is I get all the fun, the learning, the development, but I don't have the responsibility like I did in my previous work. I can pass it back to people like Adele and Gwen. I can help them a lot, I can input, but they're the ones that have to stay up at night writing up reports and proposals and things. Adele mentioned skills. I think you probably all got the skills that you need. It's all about listening to people. And that's the sort of thing you can do in your professional and personal life before you even come up with a research idea. And talking to people about their conditions. Lots of people are very happy to talk about their conditions, but finding out what matters to them. Two people might have the same condition, but how it affects them might be different. So that can be putting ideas in your head before you even start thinking about a research proposal. I've also been on an NIHR funding committee, so that is a committee that decides who gets the money. So very important. So in that, I've read loads of proposals, and some of the PPI is good. Not that much is very good yet, but some of it is good. Some of it is not so good, and some of it is, oh dear, go back to the drawing board. So there's lots out there. And one of the things that I always want to say to researchers is go to the NIHR training for PPI reviewers. Then you'll know what they're looking for, whether it's an NIHR grant or not. And working with people, talked about recompense and things. Some people want it, some people don't. I take it because it costs me money to take part. I need my laptop. I need my Bluetooth streamer. Those have needed replacing a couple of times while I've been doing the work. And I'd also say, go to see people where they are comfortable, not necessarily where you are comfortable. If you want a wide diversity of people, they might not feel comfortable coming into a university if they're unfamiliar with that. You go where they meet, where they're comfortable, and then you'll get the best from them. I'm going to pass over to John. I could go on forever about PPIE. As was said at the beginning, I'm absolutely passionate about it. I love doing it myself. I love encouraging researchers to do it well. So I'll pass over to John.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Linda.
Linda. Well, I think I fell into health research by accident. When I retired from my post, I wanted to give something back, and I've got type 2 diabetes, so I went to work for Diabetes UK in London, and I reviewed their grants applications for about 8 years, which I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed. And then one day I met Adele. Well, that was everything from then on. I got dragged into Keele, dragged into RUG, thoroughly enjoyed being a part of RUG, and have been co-applicant for a number of different research projects. I'll come back to Gwen's in a moment. What do I get out of it? It's challenging. I really enjoy the challenge. I feel valued. I think on every committee I've sat, no matter where, I've been treated as an equal, and my voice has been listened to just as much. I feel like I'm making a difference. I certainly feel that with the WAVE challenge, that some of, quote what Linda says, stupid questions might have caused Gwen to rip her hair out, but she listened, and I think they did make a difference. Mentally, it keeps me very active and very busy, which is really important. And it's a big learning curve. Not only understanding research, it's a big learning curve understanding researchers, because they really do live in a world of their own sometimes, and they absolutely adore acronyms, and I could still never understand why. So working with Gwen, it was very much, the project was to do with dealing with the general public. And as Gwen said, those that are out of work, which is not the best place to be. And there was patient-facing material, there were texts being sent, and it was reviewing those and making sure that the language was simple, it was plain. And I think on a couple of occasions, Gwen and the team presented me with something, and I just said, well, I wouldn't respond to that, and I throw it in the bin. Well, at least they had. Gwen then sat back and said, okay, why? And once you can justify that, they take that on board, which is really important. Rather than the stupid questions, I like the idea of throwing the spanner in the works. You can ask the awkward question from a very, very naive point of view. And sometimes the awkward questions can be the most important questions, because a public contributor is a little bit outside the research forest, and they can ask those questions. As Linda says, I'm currently an NIHR reviewer for grants. And when I sit at funding committees, and I was there down in London on Monday, it's worth bearing in mind that I have exactly the same vote and the same input as any professor or doctor sitting with me. And my role is particularly to comment on PPI and the plain English summary. And I would just give these pointers, and these are personal pointers, they're not NHI documents or anything. Is it clear and concise? Short sentences. You know, they're talking a plain English summary, sentences, 20 words. And again, I noticed that when put up Diabetes UK website, NIHR website, there are some really good tips out there. No jargon, no acronyms, unless they've been explained. Because if you put acronyms in and don't explain them, people like me will actually make a very adverse comment about that. What's the rationale behind the research? Why are you doing it? How is the project to be conducted? So just a very brief run through the project. Then we get to, what is the role of PPI? Are there PPI co-applicants? Are there PPI advisory teams? Where does PPI fit in? In the planning, I think Gwen said it and Adele said it from the very beginning, from the start all the way through to the very end. And the biggies at the moment are PPI for people with lived experience. That's the new jargon word, lived experience. So if you're doing a project, try to get PPI members who've actually lived that. I'm a bit critical of what I call the professional PPI, the ones that just come from charities. They get paid to be a PPI, but they don't have lived experience. That's one of my personal bugbears. And then at the moment, the big thing is equality, diversity, and inclusion. How, in your planning and in your PPI, are you going to ensure that members from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, are recruited and play an active part? And I admit, even now, EDI is proving to be a big, big stumbling block in an awful lot of applications. People talk a lot about doing it, but they don't really know how, and they haven't planned it. And I'll shut up there.
Super. Thank you, Linda and John, for that really useful oversight as to how you got into it and the benefits that it's brought for both of you as well. That's really good to hear. So I'll open the floor to questions. While people are having a little think, there is one question in our chat at the moment around, is the approach to involving veterans any different to the general public? Adele, I think that might be one in your direction. I see you nodding. Good.
Yeah, so I don't think it matters who you involve. I think the approach is the same. I think it's about thinking about explaining what patient and public involvement is. When you speak to members of the public about research, they more or less think about a research participant. So I think whoever you're speaking to involving, make sure that you explain what it is by public involvement, that they're helping to shape and design the research. And I think it's about, you know, building that relationship, even that if that's a telephone call or by emails with the people, slowly building that relationship and explaining, you know, if you want a meeting or, like I say, a one-to-one telephone call with them first and offering the support. But I think if you think of those things, it doesn't really matter who you approach. I think you'd approach them all the same, if that helps.
Thanks, Ada. It's about being sensitive to the needs of the group that you're trying to engage, really, isn't it? And that will be different for different groups, absolutely. Any other questions from the attendees? Marta.
Hello, hi. I maybe it's not a question, but it's little appreciation moment. I'm a second year student paramedic here at Keele, and although I don't have much experience with the research, I'm only at just the beginning of that journey. Last year we had the pleasure to meet Linda, who not only delivered a lecture but took part in our simulation day, and it was the first time I think that I could see an actual link between a written research and a kind of real life experience. So it kind of bridged the gap for me between something that is written somewhere in, on the internet, and the changes I could make as a future clinician. So obviously it was around communication, the barriers, hearing loss, hearing impairment, and it kind of influenced me not only like professionally, but personally too. I made some changes around, some habits, but also my attitude towards, people with hearing loss, hearing impairment changed a lot. I've got some tools now that I can use and create that kind of safe space. So although it's not a question, I thought it's a perfect opportunity to say I actually understand the reasons behind those research, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be able to understand. So thank you to all those people that actually want to share the lived experience, because it meant a lot for me. Thank you.
That's wonderful to hear, Marta, and it's lovely to hear how that direct experience has really influenced your views and experiences yourself. And that's the thing. I think PPI can feel quite abstract until you actually sit down with someone with lived experience and really stop and listen and engage them in your ideas, listen to their ideas and experiences to kind of bring everything to life, really, doesn't it? And that's the purpose of it. Linda, that's a gold badge for you, I think, there. So we'll give it to you later. Any other queries, questions, or even just reflections on whether and how you think you can use this to influence your work going forwards, be that clinically or your research work? No, that's okay. I appreciate we are at just about lunchtime. You're probably all needing to get off. Linda, hand went up there. Oh, I think you're on mute, Linda.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Marta. She was great at taking part as well, and I think would be great at talking to people about their experience. It's a two-way thing.
It is an active relationship, isn't it, in terms of you are both learning from each other, you're both listening, or you in the group. So it is lovely to hear that experience.
Can I also just say thank you to Linda? I appreciate that. Thank you.
If there are no further questions or reflections, Alicia, am I right in that the slides will be shared and the recording will be available on the website as well?
Yes,
and thank you everyone for joining. Is that all sorted, Alicia? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.